When you think of some of the most violent fighters in the lightweight division, it's hard not to bring up the human highlight reel, Justin Gaethje.
Goodness, he heard
Fox Sports Act.
One of the most violent fighters to grace the octagon, and a fighter who's quite literally not afraid to die when he steps into the cage. And then you have Rafael Fiziev. Up to this point, Fiziev has been terrorizing every opponent in his way, and the scary part is that his technical striking is right on par with his brutality. Sure enough, the fight was going to be interesting because fans wanted to know if Fiziev was the real deal. In fact, many favored Fiziev to be the favorite after what he's done to opponents, but sure enough, Justin Gaethje ultimately took home the victory. We know the outcome of this fight, but the story of how it played out says a lot, and that's why we're here today. Fans often forget that behind Justin Gaethje's brutal nature lies a technical fighter with a lot of depth, and the way that this fight played out demonstrated this once again. So we'll be breaking down the technical story of this fight and some of the fascinating tactics from both these fighters. I think you're going to be pleasantly surprised with what I discovered because Justin did something very drastically different that changed the tide of the fight in the final round. But first, how did this fight start off? These guys didn't just start off right away throwing shots, they seemed to respect each other enough to really take some time to find their openings, so as a result there was somewhat of a feeling out process. We saw a lot of feinting in attempts to find shots. Fiziev would attempt his attack entries, and so would Gaethje. This was fascinating to me because we would see Gaethje pull off some of his offensive tactics from his bag of tricks one by one, and from what I noticed, a lot of his usual tactics that would work on previous opponents just couldn't quite work on Fiziev. Likewise, Fiziev equally had a hard time finding tricks that would work on Gaethje. For example, one of Gaethje's main go-to tactics against Tony Ferguson was to throw that leg kick and then weave under a possible counter shot in order to fire his hook afterwards, and this worked quite well against Tony. Against Fiziev, it wasn't quite the same case. When Gaethje came in to fire the leg kick, as soon as he tried to weave, Fiziev had a tendency to go for underhooks or close in. As a result, it would smother Gaethje from following up with that weaving hook. Even in one case where Gaethje would attempt a hook, Fiziev would simply slip away from that shot. Okay, so this particular tactic didn't land so well. So what else did Gaethje try? Gaethje would try other ways to open up shots as well. We would see him attempt things like trying to mix up his wrestling so that he could potentially open up shots to land to the head. So you'd see him level change, force an engagement, and attempt to finish off with shots to the head. Gaethje would attempt this again, but from what I was able to observe, Fiziev would catch on to some of these movements. Like in this example, Gaethje would attempt to fake a level change, Fiziev would catch on, and then the next thing you know, moments later, when he attempted this again, a flying knee came and it tried to intercept Gaethje's level change. From what I could tell, Gaethje was more conservative about trying this again after the knees came flying in. Overall, Fiziev was pretty keen on noticing very important details in Gaethje's habits. Gaethje also had a tendency to defensively lower his posture via dipping or slipping to defend himself. As a result, Fiziev would capitalize on this in many different ways. The first method was to pump out the lead hand in order to draw Gaethje into lowering his posture, then he would fire the uppercut to intercept Gaethje's crouched position. The second method was to pump the rear hand to bait Gaethje into slipping over and then firing his flying knee. Generally, Fiziev likes to pump that rear hand to fake various attacks, and one of his common attacks is to pump the rear hand to bait a reaction, then close in with the gazelle hook. His kicks were also effective, but he didn't seem to quite build a lot of offensive opportunities off of them. Fiziev made some really good reads on Gaethje's habits, but he couldn't quite land clean through his defenses overall, and this is really important because it highlights a very important detail about Justin Gaethje that fans often forget. Justin Gaethje isn't the same fighter he was when he first entered the UFC. The Justin Gaethje you saw fighting Dustin Poirier wasn't the same fighter that you saw today. I went over this quite extensively in previous videos about the changes that he's made, and you can view them in the link below, but the main idea I want to emphasize here is that Justin Gaethje's growth has really put him on another level. While the previous Justin Gaethje would have preferred to tank shots on his guard and press forward, Gaethje today is nowhere near that reckless. He's far more willing to use head movement, footwork, and evasion to deny opponents a chance to attack. In fact, it was really a thing of beauty to study these sequences in slow motion, watching Justin Gaethje masterly evade these shots just by a few inches across different scenarios. His defensive ability is a really important part of this story because it made a difference in who was able to score the more meaningful shots as both fighters tried to find ways to find openings. On top of Gaethje's defensive improvements, he's really expanded his offensive tools. His offensive rhythm is far more diverse and he could draw from a wider range of attacks. Now this is a very key thing to keep in mind because in the past, Gaethje's attack centered a lot on his vicious leg kicks. However, in this fight, although he used leg kicks, they weren't actually the defining aspect of this fight, and this is surprising since Gaethje is generally known for chewing opponents up with his leg kicks. He could go to those leg kicks if he wanted to, but because of his offensive abilities and how they're more diverse these days, he really didn't need to focus his attacks around those kicks that heavily, and that's a crazy part because it shows the level of depth to a skill set. One of the key factors that played into Dustin Poirier's victory against Justin Gaethje was that he became very keen on finding his timing against Gaethje's kicks, so I'm actually amused about what the rematch would look like today against Gaethje, who doesn't really have to rely on those kicks as much now. Going to the final round against Fiziev, a switch seemed to turn on for Gaethje and the plan started to shift in a different direction. Things really started to change in Gaethje's favor, but how? The jab is one of the most common attacks in combat sports. It's an important tool to have, so it would make sense to have an effective counter for it. This is where the pull counter comes in. I created a detailed guide that may help you land this better by introducing you to different concepts when fighting. These are principles that help me out, so they may be useful to you too. For the time being, you can access this by subscribing to my newsletter on my website. Links are in the description. Don't forget to hit that like and that bell icon if you like this video. Alright, let's get back to the video. First, let's check out what his coach had to say in his corner.
Don't forget your low high, okay? You got it? Pressure him with your jab. Okay, it's a close fight, but let's push him back. Put him on his heels, baby.
One of the goals was to apply more pressure with that jab, and that's exactly what Gaethje did. The jab and the uppercut were the two defining aspects of the final round that really allowed him to take the victory. Fighting long with the jab became a focus, and Gaethje mentions that one of the reasons why he decided to fight long with the jab was because Fiziev was just way too fast on the inside. Gaethje wanted to keep that pressure up, but from a further range where he would be away from a firefight in the pocket. I thought that was just really good judgment from Gaethje, and it really does show his maturation as a fighter. The crazy part was that he didn't necessarily need to do it. Even though they would engage in these intense exchanges in the pocket, I found that Gaethje was pretty defensively sound even in those trades. In some of the exchanges where they end up grappling, Gaethje saw a lot of good moments exiting with punches. One of his signature tactics was to smother the range, then open up that space on his own terms to fire his hook. You'll notice I'll sync the color tie here, and you're going to see that in this green space that he smothers the range on that side, so you can't really attack. So what he's going to do is he's going to step his lead foot out laterally. This opens up a new angle for him to attack, and this lets him move in a different angle away from danger into a more defensive spot. Another neat detail you'll notice too is that since he's controlling that one side of the opponent's weapons, he's going to be moving away from the other side of the opponent's weapon, so even if the attack was going to come, he'd be moving away from that attack into a more defensive angle. So after stepping out laterally, he opens up a wider range of motion to fire his hook, and this is because of his foot positioning. It lets him exit out of harm's way. Despite how sound Gaethje was on the inside, deciding to fight long proved to be really useful. Gaethje was landing the jab very consistently, and there were two particular ways he was able to do this. The first method was when Fiziev would step in, Gaethje would often intercept with his own jab. The second method was when Gaethje decided to advance forward. He would first pump his lead hand to throw off Fiziev's defensive rhythm, then step in with that jab. Fiziev did try to find a counter off of Gaethje's jab at one point, but he couldn't quite find a lot of consistency. Gaethje was really sharp that round and even made sure to manage his wrists. If he felt Fiziev would try to counter his jab, he would bait it out. Like this example where he would pop that jab, he'd wait for Fiziev to come in, and then he throws his check hook while exiting off laterally. So when he'll throw the jab, it's going to prompt Fiziev to come counter back in. So what he's going to do is step out laterally and then turn his head away. This is going to move his head away from the red circle for him to counter while moving away. And this is the same kind of bait that Adesanya used to bait and punish Robert Whittaker. During my time studying Justin Gaethje, I studied a lot of his earlier career fights just as he was about to enter the UFC. And the most interesting thing about him was the fact that I could barely count the number of times he threw a jab. In fact, I don't recall any at all. So to see Justin utilizing that jab in that final round was probably one of the most thought-provoking aspects of his growth as a fighter. He's really come a long way and expanded what he can do. Overall, Gaethje's offensive rhythm in the final round was really hard for Fiziev to adjust to, and this had a lot to do with how well he can mask his attack rhythm. Gaethje kept to his initiative to pressure with the jab at all times. Whether Fiziev came in or Gaethje advanced forward, the jab was always there to pick Fiziev off. The uppercuts from this round were a really important part of how this round went. The way that Gaethje set it up was actually complemented by his jab as well. You see, when Gaethje comes into jab, sometimes he'll use that to catch a collar tie or to jam the opponent. This sets up his uppercut because when he uses the collar tie, it lets him control Fiziev's posture and it makes it hard for him to strike back. Gaethje uses this chance to sneak his uppercuts in. And if Gaethje isn't able to get that collar tie, he'll often use that lead arm to jam Fiziev's weapons in place temporarily to sneak that uppercut in later. Here's Gaethje fires that lead hand. You're going to notice he's going to be able to use that lead hand to temporarily jam their weapons. This allows him to fire that uppercut. Again, fires that lead hand and he's able to jam the opponent's weapon to temporarily throw that uppercut. This fight is a reminder that it's time to update our worldview on Justin Gaethje if we haven't already. He's far more technical than what a lot of people give him credit for, and it's clear to see from how much he's changed since his arrival into the UFC. While Fiziev is sent back to the drawing board, Gaethje looks to take another run for the title, and to be honest, who knows how much fight he has left in him before he calls it quits, but let's enjoy the show for now.